There are sentences that leave our mouths before our hearts even notice what they're saying. And the worst part is, they sound right. They sound spiritual. They even sound humble. But God hears these words in a completely different way than we imagine, and some of them spoken over and over year after year slowly close doors that he had already opened. Years ago, a man made a deal with God without realizing one thing. God had never signed that deal, and he wouldn't discover this until 2 decades later, wounded alone beside a river, limping for the rest of his life. His name was Jacob. Hold on to that name. We'll get to him. There's a sentence that slips by unnoticed because it sounds like reverence. You've probably said it yourself this week, maybe even this morning. I am not worthy. A woman in a small neighborhood prayer group always began that way. Lord, I know I don't deserve for you to listen to me. She prayed every week, served her church with her whole heart, arrived early to set up the chairs, and left last to turn off the lights, never missing a session, even on the days her body begged for rest. Not once did she seem to leave that room at peace. The reason wasn't a lack of faith. It was the opposite. A sentence she pronounced over her own life before anyone else ever had the chance to. Few people realize this exact phrase already left someone else's mouth in the Bible, long before, in a context almost nobody remembers. A Roman centurion, commander of 100 soldiers, part of the very army occupying Israel by force, went to Jesus to beg for the healing of a servant. A man in that position would normally be looked at with hatred by any Jew in the region. But the local synagogue leaders interceded for him, explaining that this centurion had paid out of his own pocket for the town's synagogue. It was this man, a foreigner, a soldier, an occupier, who said to Jesus, "Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof." The word used there in the original Greek is the same word used to describe someone with enough status to host an important guest. The centurion wasn't talking about spiritual merit. He was acknowledging within the culture of the time that welcoming a Jewish rabbi under the roof of a Roman officer would have been far too awkward, even for Jesus. 2 people, the exact same sentence on their lips. One outcome was born out of faith, the other out of years of despair. Picture the scene. A narrow street in Capernaum, dust in the air, a curious crowd gathering around a foreign soldier bowing before a Jewish carpenter. Nobody there expected that, because the centurion didn't stop there. He went on, "But only say the word, and my servant will be healed." He acknowledged that he wasn't worthy, and even so he asked with an enormous confidence in Jesus' authority. And Jesus was so struck by it that he said in front of that entire crowd that he had not found faith like that anywhere in all of Israel. Saying I am not worthy to close a door is not the same thing as saying I am not worthy to open the way and ask anyway. Paul writes that Christ died for us while we were still sinners. He didn't wait for anyone to become worthy first. The blood that was shed did the work that no good deed ever could. When someone repeats I am not worthy as a way of pulling back instead of drawing near, they are, without meaning to, saying that the sacrifice still needs something added to it. And that carries far more weight than it seems to on a Sunday morning prayer. There's another sentence, this one born straight out of pain. Why won't you help me? People spend months, sometimes years, repeating that question in the dark of their bedroom. The light goes off, but the question stays lit inside. It's human to ask that. Job asked it. He lost his livestock, his servants, and then all 10 of his children, all in the same day, and still remained upright for quite a while, until his own body began to rot with sores. 3 friends came and sat beside him, some after traveling days to get there. 7 days and 7 nights on the ground without a single word, because the pain was too enormous for any sentence to hold. Only after those 7 days did Job finally open his mouth. He asked, and heaven stayed silent for a long stretch, chapter after chapter, friend after friend, each one trying to explain the suffering in his own way, all of them getting it wrong. Only then, out of a whirlwind, did a voice finally come. And when God finally answered, what did he say? Nothing about the reason for the suffering, not a single word about where it had come from. God spoke about the universe, about the stars, about the wild animals no human being could ever tame. He asked Job where he had been when the foundations of the earth were laid, who had shut the sea behind limits it could not cross. Job didn't receive an answer. He received a presence. And that alone was enough. Anyone who has never gone through a pain like that will struggle to understand this sentence. Anyone who has already gone through it knows exactly what it's talking about. The bitterness behind "why won't you help me," repeated year after year, turns into an accusation disguised as a prayer. But he promised never to leave, never to forsake. And that isn't a conditional promise, it's a sealed oath. Maybe the help is already on its way, only in a shape you still can't see from where you're standing. Remember Jacob. Now it's his turn. He was running away from home, not for adventure. He had deceived his own father, stolen the blessing that belonged to his older brother. And now that brother Esau had sworn to kill him the moment he got his hands on him. He left Beersheba alone, crossing a dry, exposed stretch of land where bandits and wild animals were a real danger. As night fell near a small town called Luz, he stopped because he couldn't walk any further. He picked up a stone from the ground, used it as a pillow and lay down right there, afraid of the brother behind him, and with no certainty at all of what lay ahead. It was on that exact night, in the most fragile moment of his life, that God appeared to him in a dream. A staircase connecting earth to heaven, angels going up and down, and promised Jacob protection, descendants beyond counting, and the very land he was lying on, with no merit on his part, no conditions attached, a cold stone under his head, a sharp desert wind, and a dream too impossible for any explanation. And still, Jacob's first reaction wasn't gratitude. What did Jacob answer when he woke up? "If God will be with me, and will keep me on this journey, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God." God had just promised him everything, freely, with nothing asked in return. Jacob, still lying on that very stone, answered with a list of demands. He even named the place Bethel, House of God, and set up a pillar there. But his heart kept right on negotiating with the very one who had already given his word. So many people pray exactly like this without realizing it. "Lord, if you heal me, I'll go to church every week. If you resolve this debt, I'll increase my tithe. If you give me this job, I'll serve more." It sounds like faith. In reality, it's commerce disguised as devotion. God is not a merchant. He is a king, and kings do not negotiate with their subjects. God didn't accept the condition Jacob tried to impose. He kept acting anyway, out of pure grace, asking nothing back in return. Except Jacob spent 20 years of hard labor in the house of his father-in-law Laban, deceived the same way he had deceived his own father, given the wrong wife on his wedding night. His wages changed 10 times over, building enormous flocks only for another man to take the credit. 20 years. Only after 2 full decades, literally wrestling all night with an angel beside a river, on his way home, terrified of running into the brother who had sworn to kill him, did Jacob finally walk away limping, with his hip out of joint, carrying for the rest of his life the physical mark of that struggle. And that same night he received a new name, Israel, he who wrestles with God, not he who negotiates with God, not he who bargains with God, he who wrestles and who, after wrestling through the entire night, finally stops resisting. It was only once he was limping that he stopped negotiating, and finally, at last, began to depend. If this word is touching some area of your life right now, write in the comments, "Lord, I trust you without imposing conditions." There's another sentence, and this one is not born out of bargaining. It's born out of the exhaustion of trying to change and never managing to. God knows I'm weak. A man who loved God in his own way carried for years a habit he could not or would not free himself from, the kind of thing locked away, hidden even from his own wife. Every time someone brought it up gently, the answer came ready, almost memorized. God knows I'm weak. He understands me. How many times have you heard that very sentence, felt relief in the moment, and the next day nothing had changed? Sit with that question for a second, because the answer isn't as simple as it seems, and he truly does understand. Paul carried a thorn in his flesh, a pain the text never fully explains, describing it almost as a messenger sent to torment him. 3 times he begged for it to be removed. The answer was always the same. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul accepted that, even saying he would boast in his own weakness. But look what he does with that same idea later. In a different letter, he asks whether we should keep sinning so that grace might increase. And he answers himself without hesitation, by no means. The thorn taught Paul to depend. It never taught him to settle. Using your own weakness as an excuse to never change isn't resting in grace. It's refusing the power grace offers. Grace isn't a pillow. It's an outstretched hand. There's one more sentence, and it only shows up when the right path costs too much. This can't possibly be God's will. A prophet received a clear order. Go to Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, a city so vast it took 3 full days just to cross. Known for brutal methods of war against the peoples it conquered, mass deportations, entire cities leveled, an army that advanced and left almost nothing standing. The most feared nation in the whole Near East at that time. For any Israelite of that era, preaching there wasn't uncomfortable. It was practically suicidal. Jonah decided, deep down, that God would never ask such a thing of him, and ran the opposite direction, the port of Joppa, a ship bound for Tarshish, a fare paid out of his own pocket just to flee a city he despised. 3 days inside the belly of a massive fish weren't random punishment. They were the direct consequence of labeling as impossible an order already given with total clarity. After he finally obeyed, walking the whole city announcing that in 40 days everything would be destroyed, he witnessed the most unlikely outcome imaginable. The king stepping down from his throne, tearing off his royal robes before the whole court, putting on sackcloth, sitting in ashes, decreeing a fast for the entire population, from the greatest to the least, even the animals. Jonah didn't celebrate. He was furious, building a shelter on a hill just to watch from a distance, secretly hoping God would destroy everything anyway. Silence. Just the wind, and one furious man sitting beneath a plant God had made, grow for shade, and then let wither in a single day. Jonah said he would rather die than keep on living to see that people forgiven. But notice what God answers in the very last verse of the book, his last words to Jonah, and the final sentence of the entire book. God asks whether Jonah feels sorry for a plant he didn't even plant, one that grew in a single night and died the next, and whether he shouldn't feel sorry for Nineveh, a city of more than 120,000 people who couldn't even tell their right hand from their left. The argument was never about the plant. It was about a man who felt more compassion for a bit of shade than for 120,000 lives. Jesus left a warning about this very same mistake. Not everyone who says, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom, but only the one who does the will of the Father. God isn't looking for people who talk beautifully. He's looking for people who obey at the right moment, even when the path costs them dearly, even when it's frightening. There's one final sentence, the quietest of them all, because it doesn't shout, it simply gives up. I did everything I could, Lord. There once was a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader respected throughout the city, the kind of man who wouldn't normally kneel in public before anyone. But he had an only daughter, 12 years old, dying at home, and that erased any concern he had left for appearances or position. He ran after Jesus, fell at his feet in front of everyone, and begged for the girl's life. Jesus went with him. The crowd pressed in from both sides, people pushing just to touch him, Jairus practically suffocating in the middle of it, barely able to breathe from fear. Along the way, a woman who had been sick for 12 years touched his robe seeking healing, and in that moment of delay, messengers arrived from Jairus' house with the exact news he had feared most. Your daughter has already died. Why trouble the teacher any further? Don't trouble him anymore. In other words, it's too late, nothing more can be done. Accept it and grieve in silence. It's what so many people repeat after years of trying to save a marriage, a health condition, a debt, a distant child. I did everything I could. Said with that particular weight, it isn't genuine surrender. It's a polite way of giving up before it's time. Jairus heard those words, and the ground must have seemed to vanish beneath his feet. Jesus was standing right there, and in that exact second, with the worst possible news still hanging in the air, he turned to the devastated father and said just one thing: do not be afraid, only believe. He went to the house, ignored the loud weeping already filling it, walked into the room, took hold of the little girl's cold hand and told her to get up. She got up. Right there, walking around, as if nothing at all had happened. Paul wrote later that God is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think, more than you can imagine on a sleepless night staring up at the ceiling. Instead of closing the door by saying, "I did everything I could," there's a better sentence to finish exactly where that one leaves off. "Lord, now it's your turn." None of these sentences is an unforgivable sin. God knows the heart of the one speaking when it comes from pain, from exhaustion, from years of carrying a weight all alone. But there's a difference between not knowing and after knowing, continuing on the exact same way. The tongue that declares death can declare life. The mouth that denies its own worth can declare grace. The mouth that accuses can choose to trust instead. The mouth that bargains, just like Jacob on that first night in Bethel, can simply obey, just like that same Jacob 20 years later, already limping, already free of the need to impose conditions. And the mouth that gives up, just like the messengers who reached Jairus, can surrender for real and watch the impossible rise back up. Maybe the question isn't how many of these you've already said this week. Maybe it's which one of them you're going to stop saying tomorrow morning. Honestly, I've said at least 3 of these myself in the last few months, none of them out loud for anyone else to hear. All of them quietly in my own room, thinking nobody was paying attention. Be careful with your words, not because God is waiting for a mistake so he can punish you, but because he's waiting for your words to finally line up with what he has already done for you. If any of these has left your mouth this week, right below, Lord, I choose the words of faith. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, maybe someone quietly repeating, "I did everything I could," right this very moment, send them this video. It might be exactly the word that was missing.